Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's discussion, Affordable Utilities for All Hoosiers. I am Bryce Gustafson, Citizens Action Coalition's program organizer, joined by Ben Inskeep, our program director, and Kerwin Olson, our executive director. Just want to start by thanking everyone for taking time this evening to be here for this very important conversation. Just a little about us before we get to that conversation. Citizens Action Coalition is Indiana's oldest and largest consumer and environmental rights organization. We were started by a wide variety of folks back in 1974 during the first energy crisis here in the US. Through the years, we've worked on a variety of different issues, including pollution control, healthcare, public transportation, redistricting reform, and farming issues through our education fund. But our main focus today, as it has always been, is to advocate for residential utility customers here in Indiana. We're always working towards energy solutions that not only benefit our environment, but our wallets as well, especially right now. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. We are live streaming to Facebook. You are more than welcome to ask questions there. For those here with us on Zoom, please use the Q&A section. We will have time at the end of our discussion to answer questions, but if we can't get to all of them tonight, we will do our best to get back to you with an answer. I'll stop there and pass it on to Ben Inskeep. Ben?
Well, thank you very much, Bryce, and good to be with you all tonight. I hope everybody's having a great summer so far. I'll be kicking things off today by starting with discussing why our energy bills are so high right now. What are some of those dynamics that have led to skyrocketing energy prices? Then Kerwin is going to kick it off to discuss what we're talking about when we're talking about affordability or unaffordability when we talk about our utility bills and why that's such an important topic. Then I'll come back and I'll be discussing what we're doing to advocate for lower energy bills in the state and for clean energy solutions, as well as what are some things you can do at your household, at the household level, to reduce your energy bills and save money. Okay, so let's dive in now to why energy bills are rising. If you've opened up your electricity bills recently and it seems a lot higher than it used to be, you're not imagining things, unfortunately. Across our state, we've seen our electric utility bills rise for the past several decades. As you can see in this figure here, the left side of the graph shows what average energy bills were for our 5 investor-owned utilities back in the year 2000. And these average bills were under $100 back then. As you can see across time, they've risen steadily to where now they're over $120 on average for all 5 of our investor-owned utilities, currently averaging $155 per month across those 5 utilities. Even after you factor in inflation, electricity costs are still rising. They've risen 22% after adjusting for inflation since the year 2000. And yes, if you don't see your utility on this graph, it is very likely you are served by a municipal utility or rural electric cooperative. They've also experienced similar trends, but in the interest of focusing with only a narrow number of lines I have not graphed our many dozens of utilities in the state. So bills are rising. What are the factors behind those increases across time? Well, definitely there have been several big factors at the policy level that have driven some of these cost increases and have resulted in these skyrocketing prices. So for one thing, we've had legislation that has passed our General Assembly that has allowed utilities to pass along a lot of their costs automatically to customers through things like bill riders or trackers. So this would be things like their fuel costs when the cost of natural gas or coal spikes suddenly, those costs are passed on to consumers. And same with lots of types of investments our utilities do. Things like putting pollution control equipment on top of coal plants to reduce their emissions are one example of a major investment a lot of our utilities have had to make the past few decades that have resulted in bill increases. But that's not the only type. We also have something called a transmission, distribution, and storage improvement charge, which was a policy that essentially gives our utilities in the state a blank check when it comes to their spending on the transmission and distribution grid. Because of that policy that was passed by the General Assembly, it took a lot of control away from our regulators, the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission, when they are evaluating whether or not a utility's plans for grid spending are reasonable or not. So that's kind of reduced a lot of their ability to control some of those costs. We've also repealed some really important policies that have helped drive down costs for consumers. Policies that gave consumers choices, and now those choices have been eroded. So a couple examples of that are the repeal of our energy efficiency standard in the state. Our energy efficiency standard required our investor-owned utilities to set ambitious energy efficiency goals and then have really robust programs that had things like strong incentives for consumers to invest in energy efficiency equipment. Those programs have since scaled back because now that energy efficiency program has much lower goals and targets for our utilities. And on a similar to the energy efficiency erosion, we've seen the credit rate that customers get for investing in rooftop solar also significantly reduced through changes to our net metering law. So those two program cuts have really prevented consumers from some of the choices they had in the past that helped control their energy bills. And then the last point I'll mention, although it's certainly not the only issue, is just the way that costs are spread out across customers. A lot of our costs are not fairly spread out, and so it's resulted in an effect where residential customers, households and families, are paying higher bills in order to subsidize our industrial and commercial customers. So that cost allocation is not fair, and that's another type of issue that we've been advocating on. So those are some of the kind of legacy trends, maybe from the past decade or two, that have impacted Hoosiers. But more immediate concerns are also impacting our electricity bills today. A big example of that is the cost of commodity prices, particularly for things like coal and fossil gas or natural gas. They have risen really dramatically across the past year or so. Natural gas prices are now 145% above where they were a year or at the beginning of the year. And Illinois Basin coal prices, the Illinois Basin includes coal mined in Indiana. Those spot prices are up over 300% this year. So these really big cost increases to those fuel inputs are passed directly on to our energy bills from our utilities. So as you can imagine, if the cost of fuel is spiking dramatically, that's going to mean a big increase to customer bills at the end of the day. And this figure kind of illustrates that at the wholesale market level. Indiana is part of the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, which is a grid that spans from Canada down to Mexico in the middle of the country. You can see on this map, or this portion of the grid that's highlighted here from one particular moment in time in the day, that Indiana's market prices are higher than our neighboring states and also other states in the Midwest. And this is kind of a nice illustration of the fact that we're paying higher energy prices today because of our reliance on power plants that are powered by coal and natural gas. Because of our heavy reliance on those types of power plants, our prices are a lot more expensive right now for electricity. So let me turn our conversation now over to Kerwin, who is going to talk about the issue of affordability and why that is so important for Hoosiers. Kerwin, take it away, please.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. I'm going to take a little bit of a pivot here and talk about affordability, or rather unaffordability, if you will, and the struggles of economically distressed households in our state, and some things we can do to help them out. And then I will turn it back to Ben. I just wanted to start with just a little bit of data. I think most folks are aware of the struggles that economically distressed and other low-income and vulnerable households are facing with meeting daily needs. But this is data from Indiana 211. That, of course, is the Connect to Help line that folks call when they need help. And this is from just a few days ago that shows over the last I think this is a 15-month period of time or so, assistance paying folks' electric bill is now the #1 need that people are calling 211, with the gas payment assistance not too far below that as well. But the #1 reason people are calling 211 for help right now is for help paying their electric bill, more than are calling for assistance with rent. So we have an affordability crisis here in our state. Another quick data point: there was a great report put out by the Center for Biological Diversity and Bailout Watch and Tiger Moth late last year that was just updated in April, called "Powerless in the Pandemic." The pandemic, of course, put a mirror to society and all the things that folks are struggling with. And what they learned was that for states that reported disconnect, more than 3.6 million Americans were disconnected in 2020 and 2021. 9 states from those that report disconnect that they had disconnect data for, disconnected more than 100,000 folks, and Indiana was one of them. Matter of fact, we were 3rd in total disconnections at 264,000 plus disconnections for electric customers over that period of time. Additionally, there were 7 specific utility holding companies, 3 of which operate in Indiana, and those 7 utility holding companies also had more than 100,000 disconnects during that period of time. And the 3 operating in the state of Indiana were, of course, Duke Energy Indiana, Indiana Michigan Power, a subsidiary of AEP, and AES Indiana, serving the capital city here in Indianapolis, disconnected over 100,000 people during the 2020 and 2021. And really what we're talking about here, a bunch of low income and consumer advocates got together, and we really want to change the narrative again, back to the idea, the fundamental foundation that utility service is absolutely a human right. Safe, reliable, affordable utility service is an essential human need, necessary for health, safety, dignity, and to allow people to participate in society in a meaningful way. State law should explicitly recognize that uninterrupted utility service is an essential human need and essential to public health and safety. And utility service should, of course, be affordable for everybody, for all households. And so there's a few obligations that we believe fall on the shoulders of policymakers, regulators, and other decision makers, those at municipal utilities and co-ops. And that is, everybody throws around the word affordability, but we really need to nail down and at least define what is unaffordable, or what are we considering a high energy burden. And there's general acceptance, almost unanimous acceptance, that an energy burden for a household that is greater than 6% of your income is considered a high energy burden. And an energy burden greater than 10% is considered severe. So we need to recognize that from the perspective of households that might need help in affording their monthly bills. That's not to say that anything less than 6% is necessarily quote unquote affordable, but we are well aware of when that burden gets to the point of becoming problematic for households, economically distressed households that are forced to make those heat or eat type decisions. Do you fill your prescription? Do you pay your rent? Do you pay your light bill? Folks shouldn't have to make those sort of choices about the necessities of daily life. The other thing that policymakers need to do is require that utilities report customer data, but furthermore, report that data by zip code or census block. If we're not collecting data about customer collections, information such as number of disconnects, arrears, number of payment plans, deposits, that type of information, how are we ever going to know whether or not Hoosiers can afford their utility bills? And we need to collect that permanently over a long period of time so we can observe short and long-term trends in terms of our overdue balances growing, are more people late paying their bills, those type of things. Furthermore, we also need that data at a zip code level and a census block level so that we can investigate when disconnections might disproportionately impact communities of color or other specific populations. And furthermore, make sure we utilize that data and remedy the disproportionality of those disconnections or other inequities along with credit and collection practices of utilities. And the other thing that we believe is an obligation of policymakers is that disconnections based on a household's inability to pay have to be eliminated. The idea that we're disconnecting households from essential human services because they can't afford to pay the bill is just not acceptable for a healthy society. And just quickly on residential energy burden, this is a chart from the most recent low-income home energy report from the Department of Health and Human Services that show the blue graph, or the blue bar, is the energy burden of all low-income households, defined for purposes of this report as households at or below 150% of poverty. And you can see the energy burden for those households versus all households, which are in red. There is a huge disparity between the percent of income that the everyday household is paying towards their energy bill versus that burden on low-income households, well in excess of 10%, that severe burden. And we have this information, and we need to utilize this information. Some further obligations from our perspective that decision makers have is we have to require targeted monthly bill affordability programs. We cannot rely on crisis funding, because most of what we have today is crisis funding that people seek out when they are threatened with disconnection or having issues. We need monthly programs that create sustainable, affordable bills for all Hoosiers on an ongoing basis. We need to coordinate that funding with the low-income home energy assistance program, the one everyone is familiar with, or LIHEAP. We need to make sure that these affordability programs, these assistance programs, have a predictable and reliable funding stream that is paid into by all ratepayers, all classes of ratepayers, that provides steady funding and predictable funding so that these programs don't run out of money. We can't continue to rely solely on charity, poor relief agencies, philanthropy, and other things to take care of folks' basic needs. We need to make sure that all households can afford their bills on a monthly basis. And there's several different models to choose from for these low-income programs. A straight bill discount, which is administratively easy, but doesn't necessarily recognize the income of the household. There's the percentage of income payment plan, which is programs they have in states like Ohio and Illinois, to our east and our west, that sets utility bills at a certain percentage of income, whether that be 4%, 6%, 8%. Those plans vary by state. Or the more popular program is a hybrid of that has a tiered discount based on income level, where the deeper poverty, the more economically distressed a household is, they would receive a bigger discount on their monthly bill, and that discount would go down as their income goes up. But we must couple those monthly bill affordability programs with robust and targeted income qualified EE programs. We know that low income and economically distressed households live in older housing stock, far more inefficient housing stock, are using far more energy than the average everyday general residential ratepayer. So we must have well-funded, robust statewide programs that are coordinated with the federal program, the Weatherization Assistance Program, otherwise known as WAP. We must ensure that there's adequate funding for health and safety. And what are we talking about there? There's an alarming rate of what we call deferrals or walkaways. When the CAP agencies or other providers go into a home to weatherize, we are walking away from anywhere from 50 to 60 to 70% of homes because of health and safety issues that weatherization funding will not cover. Health and safety issues are things like gas leaks, carbon monoxide leaks, broken windows, mold, insects, leaky roofs, those type of things. So over half of the homes that we go into to weatherize, we can't weatherize because they're living in a moldy home or a wet home or a moist home or some other issue. And that's just immoral. We've got to make sure we have adequate funding to address all those issues so that we can provide all Hoosiers healthy and safe and dignified place to live. And then we have to make sure that these programs are free of any upfront payment requirement for qualified households. These are low-income households, economically distressed households, and they simply don't have the cash or equity to make upfront payments for some of these programs. So those are some of the things that we need to do. Monthly affordability programs coupled with robust, targeted income qualified EE programs. And just quickly wanted to share some stats on LIHEAP, because we frequently hear that, well, there's LIHEAP, why do we need anything else? Well, first of all, LIHEAP is only a one-time benefit given during the heating season. And secondly, this chart will show you the red are the households in the country that received the LIHEAP benefit. The blue bar, that is the bar of households that are eligible to receive the LIHEAP benefit. Today, we've been seeing numbers somewhere around 15–16% of eligible households actually receiving that money. And we can see the number of households eligible to receive LIHEAP continues to grow on an annual basis. So we need more funding, and we need more robust outreach to these households to ensure that we reach everybody that is eligible to receive this funding. And then I'll close. We don't want to forget our friends at the utilities. And then I'll turn it back to Ben. But what are the obligations of utilities? Well, complying with the regulatory compact, for one, would be nice. We give these utilities a monopoly franchise in exchange for serving all customers. They have a legal obligation to provide utility service to everybody in their service territory. And from our perspective and the perspective of many consumer advocates, policies that lead to disconnection for customers who cannot afford to pay their bill, that is inconsistent with that regulatory bargain and that commitment to serve. Furthermore, we've seen a lot of increases in fixed charge on customers, charges that remain flat regardless of your energy, water, or other consumption. We need to limit fixed charges, especially on low-income and economically distressed households. And we have to remove and eliminate these punitive charges for qualified customers. By qualified customers, I mean primarily low-income and economically distressed customers. But overwhelmingly, it is those households who experience affordability issues and payment difficulties that are assessed large deposits, that are assessed late fees, that pay interest, that pay these exorbitant reconnection fees. So we pile fee after fee after fee and interest after interest on top of a population that can't afford their bills to begin with. So let's get rid of these punitive charges on low-income households. Let's get rid of the ability of utility companies to then disconnect people simply because they cannot afford to pay their bill. And with that, I appreciate your time, and I will turn it back to Ben.
Great. Thank you, Kerwin. Let me pull up my slides here. And as I just have a few more slides left, so just want to remind folks, if you have any questions, we'll all be sticking around to answer those. So just make sure you type those into the Q&A box below. I think it should be on your screen there. And we'd be happy to discuss those or provide answers if it's a question. Okay, so let's move now to some of the solutions that we are advocating for, in addition to those protections that Kerwin was mentioning when it comes to affordability and the issues that we need to be considering. CAC is advocating for a number of robust consumer protection policies. For one, given the huge increase that customers are facing right now when it comes to their energy bills and other utility bills, is that CAC has been calling on the governor to create a utility affordability task force so we can address these issues head on and actually create meaningful policy that will help folks. We also have been advocating for a customer bill of rights to make sure our consumers have the adequate protections they need, as well as advocating for removing a number of bill trackers and other kind of blank check policies that give utilities the opportunity to pass along huge rate increases to customers. We also need to continue to work on our energy efficiency programs and expand those to more folks. Have more robust targets for our utilities so we can ratchet up the use of energy efficiency, which is the most affordable type of energy solution there is out there, particularly given the high cost of electricity today. We also are advocating for policies when it comes to distributed solar energy. So things like making rooftop solar affordable to more folks and expanding the types of solar to customers who might not have access to rooftop space for a solar system. So that would be through things like creating a community solar policy that would allow those customers to also directly benefit from solar energy. And then we also have been working to incentivize and encourage and prod along our utilities to accelerate the transition from fossil fuels and move that fossil fuel fleet to clean energy solutions. Solutions like renewable energy, energy efficiency, and battery storage together are a very cost-effective combination of energy solutions that can reliably meet our power needs. One piece of good news to share with you all is the progress we've made in Indiana when it comes to utility scale or large scale solar. Indiana is actually now ranked number 3 in the country when it comes to our near-term outlook for how much solar we're going to put on the grid. So that's only behind the state of California and Texas, 2 big solar states. We lead all of the other states in the country for the amount of solar we're planning to invest in and install in our state. So this is going to help drive down costs for consumers, as well as help stabilize bills, because once you install solar, it doesn't have that volatile fuel cost like coal and natural gas resources do. So it really helps provide stability for your month-to-month bills. And then I did want to close with a couple slides on some general tips for folks when it comes to reducing your energy bills. First of all, I wanted to plug the concept of the home energy assessment, or audit. This is a service I myself have taken advantage of. It's a free service provided to many Hoosiers by their electric utilities. So you can check your utilities website to see if this is an option for you to get through them. What it involves is a professional energy advisor coming out to your house to do a walkthrough of your home, and they'll help identify opportunities to make energy efficiency improvements in your house. Many utilities also have a virtual option, so if you would prefer a virtual walkthrough, that's also an option for some of them. One of the nice little perks of this is that in addition to it just generally being free, is they'll actually make some installations for you for free on the spot. So for example, if you still have a couple old light bulbs that need to be replaced in your house, those incandescent light bulbs, they can make quick fixes like putting in some LED light bulbs for you. Again, these things are free of charge. And then at the end of this walkthrough, you get a comprehensive report that provides recommendations for low cost and no cost solutions for you. So the reason I suggest this first is because every household is unique. While there's definitely some commonalities about what is the big energy users from house to house or home to home, I should say home to home, because obviously there's folks in apartments as well. Everybody has unique usage patterns. And so for what might be the low-hanging fruit for one household might not make sense for another household. So with that general advice, I would encourage you to think about what are the biggest energy users in your home, and to focus on prioritizing them. There's so many different appliances and energy users in your house. It's definitely easy to get distracted on maybe your end uses that don't have that much of an energy impact, and consequently won't save you that much money if you make those changes, even if you go to a lot of hard work to make those improvements or change your behavior. So for instance, if you've already taken the step of replacing your light bulbs in your house, your incandescent light bulbs with LED light bulbs, you've just removed lighting as a major energy usage in your household. LED light bulbs are usually 10 watts or less, so a very small amount of electricity usage. Similarly, modern TVs and computers and a lot of these other types of consumer gadgets and appliances are not necessarily major users on a month-to-month basis. In other words, they're not the things that are driving your energy bills in comparison to some of your very big appliances that are major energy uses. So definitely, it's August right now, so I'm thinking air conditioning front and center. If you have an AC unit in your home, that is very likely going to be the biggest driver of your summer energy bills. Those things can definitely use a lot of electricity. Same with water heaters, clothes dryers, other types of appliances like that. You can see from this red box on this slide that these things use just orders of magnitude more electricity, more power than some other common electricity uses in your house. So focus on these big things, look for ways to make improvements to the overall usage there. I don't necessarily mean going out and buying a brand new air conditioning unit just because it's a little bit more energy efficient than your current one. Although that's definitely an option. There are more affordable ways to address the fact that you might have a high energy bill due to your cooling needs in the summer. So that could be things like adding insulation. It could be things like sealing cracks, sealing your ductwork, sealing around windows, having your air conditioning unit and your heater regularly serviced and maintenance, that kind of thing. So there's definitely a lot of ways to get at these big things once you identify those big users in your household. Now, when it does come time to upgrade or replace or to buy a major appliance, I do want to encourage you to first go to your utilities website. That might sound a little bit strange, but believe it or not, your utility might offer you a very lucrative rebate to buy a more efficient version of that appliance. So I myself, again, just took advantage of that for one of the appliances I bought in my house. That was nice to get a check from my utility for doing the right thing there and getting a more efficient appliance. I also look for that Energy Star label on appliances. That is going to indicate that is an appliance that uses less electricity than comparable alternatives. So that's another great way. Another good heuristic or rule of thumb to look for is looking for that Energy Star label. And then in closing, I do want to highlight, I'm not going to read through all this, but I do want to highlight that federal legislation that just passed last week, the Inflation Reduction Act. That had a whole slew of tax credits for various clean energy options that you can invest in that can benefit your household. So everything from renewable energy, things like rooftop solar or geothermal or battery storage, to energy efficiency. So tax credits for things like home energy audit, if you do have to end up paying for it because your utility doesn't offer it. But things also like windows and doors that are more efficient and that can help reduce your leakage from your heating and cooling from your house. And then things like electric vehicles as well. So do check that out and don't forget about that opportunity that can also help drive down the cost of these improvements that will then benefit you through lower electricity bills for years to come. Well, great. Well, I'm going to stop there and turn it over to Bryce. Bryce, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ben. Really appreciate that. We have a lot of questions and comments. I appreciate those questions and comments. And as we answer those questions, I will be typing in links to our action pages on these issues, on the Utility Affordability Task Force and the Customer Bill of Rights webpage as well. Please take action. Please share those links out. We need all the support and help that we can get, as you folks probably already understand. So first question, I think, is more of a comment. It says, Clark, this one goes to Kerwin. The punitive charges which Kerwin referenced might be considered predatory, preying on people least able to keep up.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's really disgusting. I know that there are some folks doing work on collecting information on late charges. Just as one example, there are utilities collecting $5, $6, $7, $8, $9 million a year in late charges. But without sort of having customer data and customer information, it's hard to know exactly who is paying all those late charges, but we're well aware of who the folks that are behind bills. And this is money that goes straight to utilities' bottom line. This isn't money that's built into rates at all. That's straight to the bottom line, below the line earnings, if you will. And it's really gross. And we agree. It's shameful. We have to get rid of those punitive charges.
Thank you, Kerwin. I think the next one will be to you as well. Cliff Burke says, I've been distressed to hear that the courts have been ruling against organizations that lack standing to file against investor-owned utility rate increases. Would it help to file a class action lawsuit on behalf of citizens?
Well, I guess we would disagree that those entities lack standing. That's in the eye of the beholder, I suppose. But there is a distressing pattern lately where standing of consumer interest parties, citizen groups, have been challenged. One at the Supreme Court, one at the Court of Appeals. And we're also seeing sort of a renewed interest by utilities at the Regulatory Commission, even challenging petitions to intervene. Believe it or not, Duke Energy, over the course of the last 3 years, has twice challenged CAC's petition to intervene in 2 cases. And one of those challenges to our petition to intervene was because our office is located in AES service territory, and we're not a Duke ratepayer at CAC, believe it or not, even though we have thousands of Duke ratepayers as members. So to that question, yeah, it is distressing and concerning to many of us that work on litigation and regulatory issues, that we're seeing these challenges. It's a disturbing trend, and I don't know if I would call it a class action lawsuit necessarily, but there's been lots of talk that many of us have had over the last 4, 5, 6 years about the need to sort of ramp up our efforts, and whether that's a customer complaint before the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission or some sort of court action, that can be debated. But we do have avenues available to us, especially at the IURC, should we choose to take action on that issue or the many other issues that we believe deserve the attention. So yeah, it's possible. It's been discussed.
Thank you, Kerwin. Greg Wood says, excellent information. Thank you, Greg. As I'm planning to be the next state rep for District 41, I would appreciate possibly getting a copy of these slides and talking with any one of you one-on-one. We will get you those slides for sure. I stand with you on these policies and believe having a roof over your head is a human right. Your policies are right in line with mine. Lastly, can you address the change to net metering and how it has hurt the consumers? Ben, do you want to take that one?
Yes, definitely. Thanks for the question. The net metering issue is something, yeah, that's been very disappointing to see the change in policy there, because to back up, net metering is a billing policy. It means that when you're a solar customer, you put solar on your roof, some of the time you're going to generate more power than you need. So you can send some of that power to the grid to share that extra energy with your neighbors. When you do that, net metering says you get a 1 kilowatt hour credit for each 1 kilowatt hour you share with your neighbors. And then when you take electricity off the grid to use, like at nighttime when your solar system's not generating, you will be debited 1 kilowatt hour. So it's an even 1-to-1 trade. Every unit of energy you put on the grid, you can take it back off the grid on a 1-to-1 basis. The policy that was enacted that replaced that in 2017 is called the excess distributed generation policy, or excess distributed generation tariffs. It changed the compensation you get when you send extra power to the grid. Unfortunately, right now, we don't have complete clarity or certainty about how that's actually going to be measured and implemented going forward. Even though net metering has ended and this is the now policy in place, there's a challenge right now before the Supreme Court of Indiana that's going to be heard in September with a ruling, in the months thereafter of an uncertain time. That's going to determine just how bad this is going to be for customers that want to go solar. So right now, the utilities would like to interpret that law to say that anytime you put power on the grid, you only get a small credit for that. And anytime you take power off the grid, you get charged a lot more for your electricity. What parties like CAC have advocated for and have argued in that case is that you should still be able to net your electricity usage with the extra energy you share with the grid during the month. And at the end of the month is when the change in the policy should then be measured. So right now we're kind of in a holding pattern, waiting to see what happens and how the court interprets that statute. Under CAC's interpretation, it would still it would be less favorable than net metering, but it would still mean a lot of customers could still benefit from going solar. Under the utilities interpretation, it would mean most households would not be able to afford solar because it would reduce that compensation rate so much that it would probably be not very economically feasible for a lot of folks to go solar, because it would undercut the financial incentive to invest in solar.
Thank you, Ben. Christopher Norick has more of a comment than a question, but he learned just today that after a coolant, I lost that recharge on my AC, it started using 50% less energy. Get those yearly HVAC checkups. Good advice, Christopher. Megan, on the MISO map scale, the states that are green and are paying less in fuel costs, is it because they have more renewable energy in place than Indiana? I think, Ben, that would be a question for you, my friend.
Yes, and to be clear, so that image of those prices was just a snapshot in time for one 5-minute period of the day of those prices. So they do change throughout the day, and I do have the link there. So if folks are curious and want to look at the map and see what it is right now or in a future moment of time, you can check out that link and see that in real time. But yes, that's exactly right. Some of those dynamics there that you see on that map, the difference in prices, even though it's one wholesale market, there is difference in pricing. And that is because of things like, yes, some of those states to the west of us, like Iowa and Minnesota and North Dakota, they do have more access to things like very low cost wind electricity. They have a lot more wind generation. And so that is helping reduce those power costs there for those customers. And our heavy reliance on coal power, I think, is probably the biggest driver to the fact that we have much higher prices than a lot of the other states.
Kerwin, did you want to add to that?
No, I think Ben covered that.
Okay, I just saw the little thing there. Clark says, why are utilities and regulatory agencies seemingly so averse to advocating for a long-term community conservation ethic? I think I can answer that, but I'll pass that one to Kerwin.
Well, Clark, you should know that's because of legislative and regulatory capture, because the industry doesn't like conservation efforts and efficiency and those type of things. So the special interests control the agenda at both the State House and the regulatory agencies, and so we have many legislators and regulators who bow to the wishes, if you will, of the industry. Bryce might have a different response, but that would be my answer to that question.
Much more eloquent than I would have put it, but yes. Christopher Norick, again, any suggestions for renters for getting inefficient appliances replaced? Ben?
Well, I would, go ahead, man.
Go ahead, Kerwin. This is a tricky one. Did you have a thought off the top of your head?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's always that split incentive that is incredibly challenging. I mean, it's really distressing and upsetting that we have so many renters that can't access programs. Furthermore, we have many people in multifamily housing. We have cities like Indianapolis, where I think the rate of renters is above 50% in a place like a city like Indianapolis. And so you have that split incentive between, you have a landlord who generally has no incentive necessarily to improve the efficiency of that home, because generally speaking, they don't pay the electric bill, they don't pay the energy bill. Some may pay the water, wastewater bill, but even that is changing, where we're seeing multifamily tenants being billed for all of those utility services. So that is a challenge that many of us that work in the energy efficiency space and work on designing and implementing programs, we still struggle with in terms of how to reach those populations, how to reach those property managers, those property owners, those landlords, and those renters. So I wish I had a good answer to your question, but it's getting frustrating seeing policies like the Inflation Reduction Act that just passed with all of these great tax credits and incentives for renewable energy, but yet we are missing an entire population of people, and a good percentage of the population of people we're missing are those that most need those sort of improvements in your home. So I would say we could start with stronger landlord rules, landlord-tenant relationships, more codes, ordinances, laws, rules, regulations, et cetera, on landlords in terms of energy efficiency appliances and other things. We looked into a program that Boston had. This was 10, 15 years ago or so, but they had requirements as far as the energy ratings of washers and dryers, refrigerators and dishwashers in multifamily homes. So things like that, probably starting at the local level, trying to get local communities to pass standards, appliance standards, energy standards for landlords. It's a heavy lift, but that's an excellent question, as that's a population, especially multifamily tenants, that we need to do a better job in terms of reaching, and we need to get landlords to be far more cooperative. Sometimes that's done with a stick, sometimes that's done with a carrot. I think this is something that probably needs some combination of both, but it's been a challenge. We've even talked to the folks at Midwest Energy Efficiency Alliance and ACEEE, the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, And this continues to be a conversation that we're all trying to solve. And I would even say the utilities also have tried to figure out how to reach these populations. So not a good answer, but an excellent question, and one that we continue to struggle with. But you were going to say something, Ben, I think, so go ahead and add to that if you'd like.
Well, you said it better than I could, Kerwin. So yeah, definitely it's a big challenge. And I don't have any easy answers when it comes to major appliances that might be outside of your control. That might be something that's owned by the apartment complex. Yeah, that's really difficult. So I would say, do what you can that's within your control. Practically speaking, that might mean you're focusing more on things like the light bulbs in your apartment. It might mean you're looking at opportunities with your, maybe your water heater is not very efficient, but maybe you can turn down the water heating setting so that you're not having it too hot and you're using way more electricity than you need to actually provide hot water for your household. So you have to be a little bit more creative. And I think Kerwin hit the nail on the head. It's a frustrating challenge that we're working on, and it's difficult because of that split incentive between the owners of the building versus the occupants of the building, and they have different motivations.
Thank you both. Cecilia has a question. What about declining block rates? I live in an apartment and I understand I pay more per kilowatt than someone in the house using more than 1,000 kilowatts, I think. Ben, do you want to handle that one?
Yeah, so I would say with rate design, it can get tricky because you're right. You don't want to have your electricity rate set up where you have less of an incentive to save electricity just because you're a lower usage customer. So I think that is one of the issues with some of the legacy rate designs some of our utilities have, that they're not setting maybe the right incentives for folks to want to be energy efficient. Kerwin, what would you add to that?
Well, I would add declining block rates matter a lot to CAC. It's sort of disgusting that the more you use, the lower your rate is. We are incentivizing, in many respects, usage. For all intent and purposes, PURPA back in the late 70s sort of outlawed declining block rates unless a utility could present the evidence before a commission that they were justified. We don't feel the utilities in Indiana that have declining block rates have justified the continued use of declining block rates. We have entered into some settlement agreements with a few utilities that are phasing out that declining block rate over time, but we felt so strongly about it, we took it to court. We litigated over a commission order approving declining block rates, and it was an interesting order from the Court of Appeals where they agreed with us in theory. They said, yeah, it's a shame that these folks have declining block rates, but there's really nothing we can do about it from a legal basis. But just know that CAC is opposed to the continuation of the use of declining block rates, and we will continue to fight those rate designs when they're proposed before the commission, because we should be doing the exact opposite thing. We should have inclining block rates that charge more for the more energy. The more energy you use, the more you should pay in terms of a rate. We should be incentivizing conservation, incentivizing efficiency, and you do that with inclining block rates. You disincentivize efficiency with declining block rates. So we've got to get away from those, and CAC remains committed to opposing those when they're presented to the commission.
Thank you. Thank you, Kerwin. I'm going to kind of combine these two, but how do we move our legislators to do the right thing? Electric utilities and issues you raise. And also, is there any hope with the current legislature and the IURC to respond to our issues? I'll leave that for
I'll give the boilerplate answer, I guess, about the importance of civic engagement, but it's incredibly important that folks talk to their state legislators, both their state representatives, their state senators. I've been, surprised a lot by how many people don't even know who their state senator and their state representative are and how far away they are from those policymakers. So it's important to communicate in writing, through email, at meet your legislator meetings, town halls, those type of things. Express your concern, share your stories share your struggles. And also during the legislative session, make sure you, a little plug for CAC, make sure you follow along at CAC, not only our website, but also our social media, as far as what bills are moving through the legislature, what role you can play in commenting on those bills. But there's also others out there that do exceptional work following the legislature, like Hoosier Environmental Council and our friends at Solar United Neighbors and others. But there's lots of advocacy groups out there that follow the legislature. So paying attention, following along, talking and communicating with your legislators, sharing your stories, sharing your struggles, and voting. All of that stuff is important because, having been at the State House now for 16 or 17 years, I can tell you those hallways are filled with special interest lobbyists who are wining and dining folks 365, 24/7, breakfast, lunch, dinner. They're very good at what they do. It's not just about campaign contributions. It's also about the attention that lobbyists can give legislators at meals and games and entertainment and other things. So those folks are talking to legislators every single day. And it's important that folks hear from the public and their constituents and don't get lost in the noise of the massive amount of lobbying and influence that goes on, not only during the session, but all throughout the year. Know who your legislators are, make sure they know who you are, and make sure you share your stories, your struggles, and your concerns. And then that'll begin to hopefully motivate some change.
Thank you, Kerwin. Next to you, Ben, does the proposed change to Duke billing affect those solar owners who have been grandfathered?
No. So is this in relation to the net metering question, potentially?
I believe so.
Then, yeah. So if you previously installed your solar, then the new policy change will not impact you right away. It will impact you down the line when you are no longer under that grandfathering period. So if you installed your solar system before 2018, then you are locked in for to 2047, I believe. If you installed it between 2018 and for most utilities, it would be July 1st, 2022, then you get locked into net metering through 2032. So you do have a bit of time if you were able to sign up for the net metering program before it expired on July 1st of 2022.
Thank you, Ben. Christopher, again, great question. How can we ensure that the ramp up in solar in Indiana at the utility scale actually benefits the ratepayer? I know the construction costs over the short term are going to be high, and I fear that after they enjoy those profits, there will be something new put in place to maintain their profits, like the fossil fuel levels they've enjoyed. Much like some of the energy efficiency trackers. I think this one's for you, Kerwin.
Oh, I lucked out. I was hoping you'd send that to Ben. No, it's all right. Well, Chris, there's no question everything costs money. So, I'll start by saying we need to acknowledge and understand that everything costs money, whether we're talking about investments in efficiency, whether we're talking about funding low-income programs or economic development programs, or whether we're talking about building things, whether that's solar, whether that's wind, whether that's gas, whatever the case. So I think we need to understand and acknowledge that everything costs money. And the challenge we, of course, have in Indiana right now is our coal plants are now way too expensive and retiring. And so we have the problem of the pancake effect, if you will, where we're still paying off the first mortgage and we're writing a second and a third and a fourth mortgage. There's no question that over time, once those assets come out of customer bills, that bills will go down. We'll also see significant reduction in fuel charges. Once we start seeing companies like NIPSCO, like CenterPoint, as they are pivoting towards more solar, more wind, we're going to see fewer fuel charges on customer bills. So rates will begin to come down. But to your point, I think that's why, CAC, we're intervening in the cases that we can to try to keep an eye on things. It's important to pay attention to what's happening at the commission, file comments at the commission, because there's various ways in which these projects will impact your utility bill in terms of what the utility company is seeking in terms of cost recovery. So paying attention, keeping an eye on things, making sure that rates aren't being set extraordinarily too high. but also encouraging legislators to deal with the issue of all of these stranded costs through tools such as securitization or accelerated depreciation or other ways to mitigate these enormous rate increases that I think we're going to experience. I think it's going to become a big issue. I know one utility is expected to file a rate case soon, and we'll see what that impact ultimately is. But we're going to start seeing rate increases because of renewable energy. Over time, costs will come down, but we'll be exacerbating the affordability crisis in the interim. And that again is why we need to make sure that at a minimum we're paying attention to economically distressed households, low-income households, and making sure that those who can least afford these rate increases, at least we're insulating them from these issues. But I know that's not the best answer, but paying attention to what's happening at the commission, following along with your utility, filing comments, and doing what you can to, help keep them in check, if you will, is important, as well as looking at policymakers to offer some relief related to all of these stranded investments that unfortunately folks like CAC 10 and 15 years ago said, don't spend this $13 billion on coal plants. It's going to come back to haunt us. What do you know? Here we are. We made the decision in Indiana to invest in excess of $13 billion on coal plants when we should have been building wind, should have been building solar, should have been building efficiency. So this issue in many respects, as Ben alluded to in the first part of his presentation, was the fault of state policy that incentivized coal when we should have been going the complete opposite direction. But I'm crying over spilt milk. But the reality is we've got to deal with some of these issues. And so let's start by protecting vulnerable populations. And secondly, let's get engaged with lawmakers to make them realize that the problems that they're facing and the affordability issues, and that's exactly why CAC for a while now has been calling on this utility affordability task force, because we are in the midst of a significant energy transition, whether folks like it or not. That tsunami is coming. And so let's get ahead of that. Let's have some real conversations, and let's try to mitigate the impact that these costs are going to have on consumers before it gets out of control.
Thank you, Kerwin. Back to you, Ben. I think Jim says, I think we should try to electrify more things for our climate. I don't want to penalize those who electrify more. Thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as part of, addressing the climate crisis, we do need to electrify more things over time. Stop combusting oil and gas and other fossil fuels as part of our energy needs, and move more toward making more of our end uses use the grid so we can power it through renewable energy like solar and wind. So yeah, definitely agree with you. I mean, that's one of the bright spots of the Inflation Reduction Act, in my personal opinion, is that there are some new incentives for things like electrifying, and there are some specific money for folks who are low and moderate income to help them in particular with their electrification efforts, to make some of those investments that are pretty sizable upfront costs much more affordable. So I would say that's kind of the direction we need to go in. We need to, when we saw the natural gas price slide earlier, we saw it spiking 145%. If you're stuck with a natural gas furnace like I am, you're going to be paying a lot more for heat in the winter when those prices are spiking. So I think at the end of the day, electrifying is also going to help with some of the stability of bills in the long term. But we do need to be conscious about how we do it. We do need to be conscious about not leaving folks behind. And we also need to, remove existing barriers we have in place through our legacy policies that might discourage folks from electrifying their own end uses.
Thank you, Ben. Looks like just a couple more. Another one from Christopher. In your opinion, can municipalizing energy utilities at lower rates? I feel like there might be some economies of scale, issues, even though it does remove the profit incentives. Kerwin, you want to?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, I think, the public power model, the municipally owned, publicly owned utility probably is the preferred model. However, we generally lost that argument 100 years ago about what the model would be, moving forward, and the investor-owned utilities sort of control that market space. I mean, I guess my answer to that question would be it's not allowed in Indiana. So unless and until we change the law to allow the municipalization of utilities, that's not even a consideration that's on the table. With the Electrical Service Territory Act, we embedded sort of the existing municipals in state law, and any municipal that didn't exist at that time can't exist. So you cannot form a municipal utility unless you were a municipal utility. I think it's prior to December of 1981 or 79 or something like that. So my first response would be that's not allowed in Indiana. So if that's an option that people would like to see, that's going to be a heavy lift at the State House with respect to changing that law, because changing that law means you're going after the investor-owned utilities in their monopoly service territory, and that's a pretty heavy lift. I think an appealing option would be, community aggregation. That places like Cincinnati and others are doing. We're not a restructured state. We're not a deregulated state. But I think looking at other options to provide choices to customers, making community aggregation available to cities and towns, bringing back better policies to enable customer-owned generation, improving and expanding energy efficiency offerings, as well as looking at the distribution level and microgrids and other. Let's go with where technology is going. I don't know if the answer necessarily is in the governance or structure of a utility, but what we're seeing is sort of this collective movement based on technology through virtual power plants, through microgrids, through distribution level planning, that there's a lot more players in this space. So I think we need a real and deliberate conversation sort of about that very question of what is the utility of the future? What does that look like? And I think that's where things are going. I think technology will lead us down that path. It's really sticky and politically difficult when you start talking about municipalization of utilities, especially in a state like Indiana, that for all intents and purposes have made that against the law, unless you're a municipal prior to that year. But inherently, yes, the idea of a publicly owned municipal utility generally translates into lower rates. That's arguable, though, because a lot of investor-owned utilities pay for a lot of the infrastructure that is serving some of those municipalities. So, but a conversation about what the utility of the future looks like, I think, is one that is long overdue in the state of Indiana. Yeah, we're really behind the curve. We really need to have conversations that aren't driven strictly by the special interests in the investor-owned utilities. We need a more inclusive and thorough dialogue that examines everything going on economically, socially, ecologically, and with the markets. And let's follow the markets and let's follow where things are going. Let's provide choices to customers, more options, and bring costs down. I think I'm more interested in that than I am necessarily the governance structure of a utility. That would be my response.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. Can I just briefly add? Yeah, in some, I do like the municipalization model. In theory, in practice, it has been bogged down through many years of litigation and fighting over how much, are assets worth that you're transferring to cities. So when the rubber meets the road, that can also be challenging to implement, as Kerwin was alluding to with the legal issues in Indiana for that.
Next one is a easy one. Yes or no? I think I saw something in the IRA for states having community solar. Does that include Indiana? Ben, do you want to answer that one?
I think the short answer is
no.
No. Yeah, we still need legislation in Indiana in order to open up community solar to make it available to more folks. So right now, the utilities, in theory, could have their own community solar program and offer it to customers. But by and large, they have decided not to do that. So the model that we would like to see is a model that's been adopted by a lot of other states that has allowed third-party developers to create their own community solar garden, their own community solar facility, and then have subscribers participate in that, to get a benefit, pay their fair share of the costs, and then get the fair share of the benefits of the electricity it generates. Under our existing model in Indiana, though, utilities don't have to do those bill credits. They can, they can just say, nope, we don't have any interest in doing that. You can't make us do it. So no, you cannot have community solar. So that's the challenge we're fighting against. We're trying very hard to open up those kind of solutions to customers because we think it's going to be very popular and it can actually, in states that have done this right, it can actually mean you get a lower energy bill as a result of signing up for community solar. So get clean energy and a lower bill pretty nice win-win.
Thank you, Ben. I think that answers the last question too, that was just written. But Dean had a question. Does Citizens Action Coalition provide a list of suggested candidates for office that support our policies?
The answer to that would be no. We rarely engage in electoral politics. The laws, regulation, rules around electoral politics, political campaigning are difficult to navigate. That said, we do provide extensive voting records, as well as campaign contribution of legislators, I think going back to 2008, maybe 2006 on our website. So we do track voting records and on bills that CAC follows that are consumer or environmental in nature. And you can see a running tally of every senator and every representative's voting records, as well as our campaign contributions from industry on our website by clicking on the legislator's name, and their voting records for each session will appear along with their contributions. So rarely do we engage in electoral politics, but we do provide information as far as folks' voting records and campaign contributions go.
Thank you, Kerwin. I did add our latest link in the comments section there. So it's usually everybody's favorite. I think that's, it looks like it's it. If nobody else has any more questions, I think we're good.
I saw hey, Bryce, just quickly.
Yep.
Saw a comment on heat pumps.
Oh,
and just so folks are aware, we do advocate for rebates and incentives and heat pumps. We sit on the oversight boards of the investor-owned utilities, gas and electric efficiency programs. We play a role in the planning of programs, implementation of programs, and we have been advocating for increasing rebates or adding rebates for heat pumps as well as installation of heat pumps. So that's definitely on our radar and on our list and something that we are advocating for.
Good catch, Kerwin. Thank you all so much, and I'll be remiss if I don't add that we are primarily citizen funded. So if you have the ability to help us out, I'm going to put a link in the chat there. We're not going to turn any contribution down, but don't let our modesty impede your generosity. So we need as much support as we can, not only with things that we've talked about, contacting lawmakers, but also the financial support that it takes to keep the fight going. It takes money to fight money. So really appreciate everybody's involvement tonight. If you have any questions, you can reach out to us at citact.org, and we will be in touch. Any last comments from you, Ben or Kerwin?
Well, thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time tonight.
Yeah, that's it. Had a good time. Appreciate this, and talk to you soon.